the square in a square. Welcome to our live teaching webinar today. And here we are at the end of May, and I have a very exciting quilt that I want to talk to you about, and about how to do some things that maybe are not just automatically known or learned about or taught. So get your pencil and paper and be ready to take notes, because I've got a lot to tell you, and I'm gonna move on through it pretty quickly. Now, I hope that you went back and watched our Jingle Jangle quilt, which was a new quilt we showed just a few weeks ago. If you're brand new to our webinars, know that once you have signed up with the email, you can go back in and watch all of the free teachings we've had for all of this year of 2021, going back to January, the beginning of the year. So be sure and go back and watch those and take notes. But specifically today, we're going to take the Jingle Jangle pattern that I did a couple of weeks ago, which was a brand new one, and we're going to add we're going to do an adaptation to it. We're going to change it up just a little bit, and I think you're going to be excited and motivated and enthused and all of those good words about how you can get such a beautiful quilt that looks complicated, but it's just so easy when you learn how to break it down with the square in a square system. And that's what I love to show you, and that's what I love to see those light bulbs go off above your head when you realize, oh my, that is a quilt that I normally would never have thought that I could make, and now not only can I make it, I know I'm going to stick with it and get it finished. So, what kind of got me to this point was a couple of different things. Was the Jingle Jangle quilt and the design of getting motion and movement and circle. So let's look at this quilt right here. This is the Jingle Jangle quilt. And you can see how there's some circles and some motion and some movement going on. Now this is traditionally called Jack's chain, there's a lot of cool color things that you can do with it, which I'm not going to get in that today. We're going to stick with what I'm excited about to teach, and I don't want to go off and chase some rabbits. But go back in and watch that. There's a lot of color variations that you can get with the Jingle Jangle. And you can also go to Pinterest and look up Jack's Chain and get a lot of different color variations. And a lot of students have already got their Jingle Jangle completed with their different color combos, and we've been seeing them on the premium Facebook page, and they're just gorgeous and beautiful. So if you haven't seen it, go back in and watch it. We're going to do a version of it today. So what got me to this point of the quilt that I'm going to show you today is that I hadn't done a scrap quilt in about 2 years, so my scraps were piling up. Scraps from Jingle Jangle, you're going to see how you have some pretty big scraps left over from that one. I also had some pretty big scraps left over from this beautiful red and white quilt that's called Abby's Wedding Quilt. So what I normally like to do is keep my scraps sorted as I'm collecting them through the weeks, months, and like I said, the last 2 years. Keep them organized so that when I get a grouping of them together, then I can think, okay, with this, what quilt do I want to make? So previously, the reason why this one up here, Americana, is on is because that was the one that I did previously. So I knew once I chose my quilt, as I worked with my scraps from other projects, I knew what sizes to cut and how to put them together in a basket so that I would be organized when I got ready to work on my quilt. And then for 18 months, every time I had a few minutes, or I was in between projects, or maybe even when I'm sewing, instead of using a little scrap runner, a beginner and an ender, some people call them, I would actually sew some of those pieces together. And within 18 months, I had my beautiful quilt done with little 3-inch stars. And I like something that I can do that's pretty relaxing, that I don't have to sit and think about, that it's already, organized and ready to go, so that I can just sit down and sew when I'm in between projects, or I'm in between planning, or I'm in between whatever. I like having a project always ready to go, and I like not having a deadline for it, so that I can just piece on it as I get pieces of time. So I had these scraps that I was gathering up. I worked on Americana. So now that it's done, I'm ready to think about another scrap quilt that I can work on in that same thinking and with that same pieces of time. So I had scrap pieces left over from Abby's, and I had scrap pieces left over from Jingle Jangle. So let's look down here at this tray. So as I was cutting on those quilts, I just kept my pieces, my little weird pieces that I would have left over, and I just kind of kept them sorted in size. So it made it easier when I came back to say, okay, I'm going to take this stack and I'll be able to get a 1.5 inch square or whatever out of it. And I could see what I had so I could work on my planning for my new quilt. And then here you can see where I have colors, and I have certain widths of strips in here. So as I got to a scrap, I could cut everything into that width. Now, right now you see pretty much, I'm going to say more length of it. It could be, a short strip like this left over from something, or it could be a longer selvage to selvage strip that's left. And this is pretty neat and nice in here right now because I wanted you to see it, but I have gone in and used up all of my small pieces, or they're over here on my sewing table where I've been working. Because what these turn into be is everything we do, of course, with the square and a square starts out with our square in the middle and our strips on the side. So these were my strips on my side. And so you can see how you have to have short pieces. If you know how to do the basic square, you can work with long or small. Now I also want you to look in here how I took scraps that were what I call a funky piece. See, that was kind of a leftover crazy piece. Let me see if I have some more in here or if I've used up all those real crazy ones. There's some more of that one blue one that was kind of just a crazy leftover scrap. So these all look pretty normal. I must have already cut up all of mine that were, oh, here's some in here that look real crazy. Look at this one. I just took the scrap that I had and I put it on the side of the square. And then when I trim it up to get my pieces, like I do with the square and a square system, yeah, look at that one. Then I have my pieces ready to go. So I'll leave one of these out and we'll trim it so that you can see how that, yeah, see, you don't have to go back in and trim your pieces. You just have to find a straight edge to sew to the straight side of your square and make sure that the width is on there enough. So there's a whole stack. I knew I had some crazy ones in there. Some of these are left over from Welcome Home or any projects that I've been working on. Okay, so took my scraps, cut them into strips or left them in their funky shape and sew them on to make the basic square. And then we're going to back up to these here in just a minute. So we're just kind of doing an overview. And then as I cut my pieces, I laid them in a tray or a basket so that I could see those sizes, so it was easier for me to go in and cut what I wanted to do. So what we're actually going to make today is we're going to work on this star. And you can see how I have the background that I need for the corners, and I have a square here in the middle of my basic square, like you see here, that turns into my flying geese. And these strips around on the side wind up to be my points for my 8-pointed star, and then I have to have a larger square of color that goes right there in the middle. So as I'm sorting through my scraps, I'm thinking about what I need. I need pieces to be a corner square, I need pieces to be the center square, of background and of color. I need strips and a scrap large enough to be my center. So that's what I'm looking for as I'm going through and organizing my scraps and sorting them. So we'll set these aside. So I actually had 2 different types of scraps, and I don't want to confuse you on this because when I went through and sorted my scraps, I sorted them for, when I looked at them, I thought, I have 2 different quilts here because I have, like we have in this star or this basic square, notice how I have the light in the middle and the strips or the outside is the color. And that's what I'm going to be working on for this, for the new quilt I'm going to show you today that is part of the Jingle Jangle. But the other quilt that I'm working on for my scraps, I thought I can just go ahead and sort both of these all at once. I need the opposite. I need a dark in the middle with the light on the outside. And this one was actually smaller than that. So my smaller scraps went to this quilt, and my larger scraps are going to my star Jingle Jangle. And what these will turn into will be flying geese that are opposite in color, because you see how the color is on the inside and the light is on the outside. And that's the flying geese I need. And you can see how they're pretty small. So the smaller scraps, and that's what will be over here in my Southern Skies. So I sorted my scraps for the two different quilts, and then I can work on both of them simultaneous. And I can't say that. I can work on both of them at the same time during the weeks and the months, and that way you get a little bit of variety also. So let's look back here on our table, and let's get started with what we need. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make this little star. And this you can make them any size that you want. What I'm going to use today is I'm going to use the mini ruler. I have two purposes for it on the mini ruler, and then I'm going to use our original square in a square ruler. So those are the two rulers I'm going to use. And then to get your pattern, that you need to purchase the Jingle Jangle pattern, and then to get the star that you're going to use instead of the 9 patch in here, you can get it either from the Americana pattern, which has it has all of the sizes of stars in it, exactly like we're doing, from a 3-inch to a 12-inch. So it has a 3-inch, a 4, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-inch. And the star that we're using today has the solid center square in there. Now, if you don't have the Americana book, I'm sure that everybody has, or you need to have the reference book, the Square in a Square Volume 1 reference book. This is like your Bible, your information book for the whole system. So on page 69 in your Volume 1 book, you're going to have a star that is almost exactly the same, and it's going to have multiple sizes in there for you. So you can get your star size out of either one of those. Now, in the star in this book, it has, instead of a plain square here in the middle, it has an option 1. But that's easy to substitute for a solid square. And for those of you that are very beginners, you can choose the size of star you want and get your flying geese and your corners. And if you want the solid in the middle, all you have to do is measure that long side of your flying goose and then cut your square that size. You don't have to figure anything on graph paper. Take what you have to see if what you have or what you do know can give you the answer to what you don't know. So that's how you can get that center square. So those are the items I use to get going for my sizing and to get my strips and my squares and everything all sorted out. And then I like to have just a scrap piece of paper that has colors and sizes on it. So as I'm sorting through my scraps, I can go through and say, okay, I know I need a square, a certain size for here, 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 and then I can go through and cut my stuff. So the first thing we have to do is get started on making our star. After you have your colors and your sizes all ready to go and put together. So you're going to make what we call a basic square. You have your square in the middle, you have your strips on the side, and then to make flying geese, we're going to trim this a certain way, and we're going to get 2 flying geese out of there. Smooth, flat, square, flush, and points exactly to the thread of where they need to be. That's just how cool the system is. So those of you that are very new, I want you to look at how we get a basic square. So you'll start out by putting a strip in your sewing machine, and you sew a little bit. That way everything is in the machine. It's not falling around, falling off and all that. I have seen students in class over the last 30 years, they pick up their strip, they pick up their square, they hold it in their hand, they're getting it all put on here just right, and then they sit down and try to put it in their machine. They have to lift their foot, and then this wiggles around and everything. So just pick up the strip, start it in the machine a little bit. That way you know your machine is working properly and your machine is hanging on to the strip. Then put your square down. And your square is the most important part. That is the thing that you have taken time to cut as accurate as possible. And you want to make sure that your seam allowance matches up with the side of that square, and you want the side of that square to be even across the side of your strip, nice and neat and even. So you sew one down, stop, a little space in between, put another one down. I call slap it down and sew it on, slap and sew. You sew it, you stop, you sew, and depending on how long your strip is, or your scrap, see, you can see this one was just, however long that scrap was, and so I got 3 on there. So sew completely to the end, put another strip in, and keep putting more squares. Keep loading those squares onto that strip. Now, as soon as you get to the end, so let's say you're at the end, and you can just keep doing, this is side 1, and you can just keep doing it. It's kind of brainless. Once you have your strips cut and your squares cut, you can just sit there and just start loading those squares on, and it's really very simple and pretty brainless. So when you get to the end, or you want to move on to the next step, you're going to take that another strip and start it in the machine, and then you bring these around and lay it down. So here you can see how we started this new strip in the machine, and then we brought these around and laid it down. So let's play like, see how we grab it and we bring it around and lay it down on that next strip, and you can see how that strip gets sewn on there. So that's side 2, and it's really easier if you start with the longest strips you have, whether they're just a short little scrap or the big one, but start for side 1 and 2, use the longest scrap strips you have. It's the easiest and fastest way to move through. So when I get to the end, then I just start another one. So let me turn this around so that this is the way it would actually be in the machine. So you can see how I got 2 on that one for that, because that little brown strip wasn't very long. And then I got 2 more on another little brown one, just like that. And then those 2 were on, and then I had a loose one, and it went on. And you just keep going. And when you get to a stopping spot, or you need to kind of regroup or organize, then come in here and just separate them apart. If you have a little bit of length, trim them off. I don't like extra on there. It makes it more difficult to press. And you just go in and separate these. You don't even have to use a ruler. You can do your rotary cutter. You can use scissors. Now you can see how if you get them too close together, it's a little more difficult to separate them. But if you have, just a nice finger space in between, it's very easy to go in and separate them. After you have them separated, then you're going to come over here and press. And I like to just go over the top, heat it up, let those fibers know, hey, I'm fixing to ask you to do something I've never asked you to do before, and I'm going to make you do a back bend. See how the fabric is flat, but now when you press, see how those fibers and those threads are doing a back bend. And they've never done that before, and now they're going to live the rest of their life like that. So I gave them a little bit of warning. It's just like when you go to exercise class. If you're going to do a back bend, you better warm up a little bit so those muscles know that you're asking them to do something. So I heat them up, warm them up a little bit, and then just press it. I say open, and it's not that I'm pressing the seam open. I'm pressing the square and those strips open on that square, and see how those seams go out or away, and that's how I always do it. I never change this step of ironing. Now when you have 2 sides on, then you're ready to go back in with your short strip and sew a short strip on. So see how I start sewing. So start sewing, slap that little strip on, and sew. So this is slap and sew. You're just going to cut. It just needs to cover that square. So if your square is 3 inches, this has got to be at least 3 inches. But if I take the time to cut it a perfect 3 inches, then I have to take the time to lay it on here perfectly so it will cover that square. So I make it just a little bit larger so I can just slap it down and sew it on. And this is side 3. And when you're done with that one, then you see how you just keep sewing. You start the next one. You chain sew them, chain feed them into the machine. And then you repeat that for the other side, and you have your 4 sides. So any of this step you can do, and just, you know, sit down and start sewing, and pretty soon you'll have a whole stack of them ready to roll, ready to cut and sew and start trimming. So after you have your basic squares done, then you're ready to come in here and trim them up. And we want flying geese. We've got to get 4 flying geese to go around our square. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim, you can use, these are kind of small, so I would use the mini, but you can use the original if you want. So I'm just going to put the tip of the 90 right in the tip or corner of one of those squares. And see, there's that 1/4 of an inch right there. And I have a grid line going all the way through. I have my lines going right over my seam. Now, if everything matches up pretty good on this first one, then make your cut. If your lines are not matching up good, then go to another corner. You got 4 corners to choose from, so choose the best corner to start with, because once you make that cut on the outside edge, you've got to keep the other 3 cuts in sequence with it, or square. You've got to keep that 90 going. And these in here, that's where your human element is, of the cutting, the sewing, and the pressing. And so it's not going to be perfect. But that's what I love about the square and a square system, is that it helps improve on this human element after the human has done the human element part. Now, since we're going to cut these in 2 and get 2 flying geese, I also want you to think about, because you don't have to pay attention to when you're sewing these on. If this was going to stay together and not be cut up into 2, I would probably say I don't want those 2 colors together, because they're kind of the same. But when we're going to cut these up and get 2, you can choose at this point, do you want these 2 to stay together for a flying goose? Or do you want these 2 to stay together for a flying goose? So wherever you put the 90 and leave the 1/4 of an inch, those 2 stay together. Because see, this is the 90 with the 1/4 of an inch. So those 2 colors stay together. I say that they stay married. So I want these 2 colors to stay married. So I'm going to start with the 90, leaving the 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do that to the opposite side. So since these 2 have the 90-inch seam, the 90-inch with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, these 2 colors stay together for a flying goose, and these 2 colors stay together for a flying goose. Because the next trim is the trim that we call the Texas 2-step. So you put your 90 in there, and you step it over 2 lines. Step 1, step 2. Make sure the toe or the point is right in that corner square. You don't want to cut off any of your square, and you don't want any color hanging off of that point. Now, you should have a grid line right from that line that goes through here, that goes through, and then you have to check here on the outside and make sure that your block is staying square. And if you have to choose on your lines being perfect here on the inside, or your outside being nice and even, you have to choose the outside. You have to keep that block square on the outside. So make your cut. Now, look, you've got a nice sharp point. That's what you need for your flying geese. But this is where you're going to cut. So see how these 2 separate. Those 2 do not stay married. So do the 2-step. Keep it square. And where you've trimmed sharp, where you did the 2-step, that's where you're going to come in here and cut it in half. So you can see here how the 1/4 of an inch, those fabrics, those colors stay married. Where you did the 2-step, they separate. They do not stay together. So there you have your nice flying geese. And of course you want 2 to go onto opposite sides. And that's what I have started in the process here. So 2 go on each side. And then you have to have a section that you're going to sew corner squares on. And anytime I have, so we'll just kind of lay these out here like this so you can see. So then your next rows that you sew together are like this. And anytime I have plain squares on the corner, I like to do what I call overcut. So let's say that I needed a 2-inch square to go in this corner to match up with this little flying goose. I'm not going to sew it perfect here, and I'm not going to sew it perfect there because I'm human. And so this square is not going to say perfect too. It's going to kind of twist inside that corner, and therefore when you come out here to your block, you're not going to have nice, clean, even edges. So I like to do them larger. I call that an overcut. And here you can see these with these overcut corners. And so now I would come in here and trim it up, and that's what gives me access. And so it doesn't matter how big this is or how little it is, because I've overcut those corners, and it's going to allow me to get this nice, neat, perfect star. And we're going to come in and trim this up in a minute. But I want to show you first how I sew these. Now, if you have small pieces and you have to cut 2-inch squares out of them, you know, if the pattern said 2 inches, then you would want to go 2 1/4 or something like that. So you could line these up, these little leftover pieces, stack them up very nice and neat. And you could come in here and get, I'll show you how. Stack them up as nice and neat as you can. I'm going to move these over. And I'm going to come in here first and get 2 sides of a square that are nice and even. And I love this little 4-inch corner on my mini ruler. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut 2 nice clean edges out of that scrap. So there's one. And since it's overcut, you know, let's say the 2 inch is my overcut size. When I come in here and go this way, I'm going to try to get my 2 inch. But if I have a little bit out of the corner, I know I have a little bit of room that I can work with. Or if you needed, you know, a 1 3/4. But I'm going to try to get the biggest amount I can out of it. So if I had small pieces, I could cut them in like that. But if you have pieces that you can work with that are a long scrap, which is what I really enjoy doing the best, is you can see here how we've used a long strip, and I cut it wider than what I needed. And you know, this could be a scrap that you just get a few on, or it could be a selvage to selvage piece, a longer strip. So notice how I went in here and basically did the same thing I did when I was making this. I put my strip in the machine and I loaded up my flying geese on the side. Then I would turn it around, and you can see how I have it laid it down on the strip, and I sewed it on the other side. So it looks like this, which is basically just like the first steps of making your basic square. Then, and this will really help you be more accurate, and it's what I call the science of patchwork. It's learning how to outsmart the human element. That human element is imperfection. So I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler on these because I have a lot of light or background, and I want to make sure that I don't cut. So I'm just separating. I'm not trying to make them true to anything. I'm just separating the flying geese from the strips. So when you overcut, you don't need more than a 1/4. Half an inch is really pretty much overkill. All right, so let's go over here and press these. Okay. So I'm kind of give it a little hit of heat. And I'm going to come over here on the top. Now notice how I'm coming down on that one, and I want the nose of my iron to hit right there in the middle. I want the heat to come out a little bit on each side so that it stays even, because when you add heat to your fabric is going to move around. Remember, your cotton fibers were alive at one time, and it's just like when you get close to heat, you move away from it. When your cotton fibers hit heat, it starts to move away from it. So you want to make sure that if it's moving out equal in the same direction. Now also, where the point or the seam is at, that is the most stable part of all of these fabrics because they're hanging on to each other and you've got that seam going through there. Out here, those fibers and seams are kind of loose or carefree, you know, so they can kind of run wild. So you want to make sure that you go to the center and that as I'm holding this, I'm directing it more down here where the point is at because that's more stable and more structured. And so that's going to allow my piece to stay straight and not start to bow out. So see, here's where my point is. So that's where I'm holding, not tight, but gently, just directing it, like holding a little 2 or 3 year old's hand. You're just kind of directing them where you want them to go because they don't know. They don't know if you turn loose, they just take off. You know, they're just going to run free. And so, you know, you have to learn how to raise your fabric up right so that when it gets all completed into a quilt, it's going to look and behave and you can be proud of it. And learning how to treat your fabric and handle your fabric and press your fabric is very important to get the results that you want. Now, I don't always do a lot of pressing when I'm building a block. I wait till the end because every time you add heat to that fabric, it's going to react and it's going to change. And if everything is looking the way you want it to, you don't want it to change. Remember that. So if you don't have to press, don't press until you have to. A lot of teachers, you know, say press, 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 press. You can never press too much. Well, you can. And I've seen more fabric killed and blocks destroyed and wind up in the trash because of the iron than I have of the rotary cutter or the sewing machine. So make sure you get nice clean presses. You don't want any pleats or puckers. And see how nice that is? It's not weaving, it's not curling. And that's because I told it what I wanted it to do, and then I did it, and then I expected it to happen. So just like with kids, you tell them what you expect, you stay with it while they're doing it, and then you get the results you want. Okay, so now after these are done, they're going to be crazy on both sides, both long sides of that flying goose. So I want to sew the nose side to my center section, to my stars. So I want this to be nice and neat. So now that they're pressed, and really the only reason why I've pressed them at this point is because I have to go back in and clean them up. If I didn't have to go back in and clean up the inside, I would not have pressed them. So basically, I'm putting the ruler around on that nose side and lining it nice and neat. I do like to look at lines on my ruler to see how well my block is staying true and square. And I'm just giving it just a little shave or a little trim right there on that nose side of the goose. So now I have nice clean work. And so I want you to notice here on this one, I don't know how well you can tell, but this was a strip that was cut very nice and it was sewn nice in that fashion. But I want you to look now how it veers off here. So if this square was cut perfectly and I've sewn it on here, you can see how I wouldn't have enough fabric out here along this edge or this corner. And that's what makes the blocks on the outside edge look crazy. So then after you have that cleaned up, then you're ready to sew it here to this side. And you want those seams to nest or lay flat against each other, kind of backbone to backbone, seam to seam. And you have a nice edge there. See, we've got a little bit hanging off. That means we're going to trim on the outside. And so you would sew, make sure that you go just on the inside of that nose point, and then those match up there, and then you would sew all the way off to the end. And then when you press, I have pressed these. I don't know that it really matters if you press in or out on this last one. On this one, you can see how I pressed out, and this one here too we pressed out. So once you have both sides on, and see how you can just kind of do these in batches or bundles, and here I've got these over here ready to go. So when you have your star ready, then you need to come in here and clean it up. And I love coming back to my little mini ruler with my little corner unit on there, and I'm going to line it up in that corner with my square. That means it's going to keep that square a 90, and it's going to keep it, see how I can see if it's going through, if my lines are lining up everywhere, just how nice is that star below working. You also want to look at your your points on your star. You want to make sure that you're not cutting off anything that changes the size of your block or trims off your points. You've got to have some fabric off of those points to sew the next seam on. So you've got to have your 1/4 of an inch here and here and here and so on, and then turn and do the other two sides. And the main thing I'm doing, I'm not really looking at size of my star. I'm just looking at, is my corner square staying square? Do I have my seam allowance off of my points? And how well here on the outside edge is my star staying square? And there you go. So after you have your stars made, now you're ready to do the next step. So just like this was a square in the middle and you put strips on the side, now this whole star is your square in the middle, and you're going to put strips on the side. So what I want, let's get this cleaned up here. So what I want is I want to take my star and I want to put a strip on each side. And I'm not going to trim with the 90. I'm going to switch over to my original ruler. And I'm not going to trim in the corner with the 90. I'm going to trim with the 60. So when you're working with a 60-degree angle and you're going to put it in the corner, you're not going to have two lines line up because this is a 90 corner. So let's look. See here, you put the 90 in and see how your 90 angles line up with your seams, because that's a 90 angle. When you use your 60 and you put it in the tip or the corner, notice how you only have one line up. You don't have a line over here. That's because your block below is a 90 and you're using the 60 on the ruler. So what happens is you get this unusual angle over here instead of a normal triangle point like we've used here. And what we want, what we're trying to do, is the jingle jangle. So I want you to look here at these pieces of these stars. So notice how this one is kind of turning to the right and this one is turning to the left, and you do alternate blocks and see how it turns in. See, these two come together and turn in, then these two come together and turn in. So you would do those in groups of two and then sew those together and do it as long as you want for the width of your quilt. The size I'm working with, these are about 7 inches cut, so therefore you could do multiples of 7 for however wide your bed is, and that tells you how many of these in a row you need. For a queen, you would need about 13 of these in a row. So let's look back at the 60. So on some of these, to make them twist one way, we're going to use the right side of the 60. And on the other ones, to turn the other way, we're going to use the left. So if I put the left side of my 60 in this point, then you can see how this one is, if you use the left, it's going to turn to the right. If you use the right, which would be this one, if you use the right side of it, you can see how it turns to the left. Okay? So let's look at how we're going to cut these stars. So the only difference in the Jingle Jangle, the original one, from the new Star Jingle is that instead of having a 9 patch in the center, we're now going to use a star. And I really think this one would be so pretty done with a very tiny little star like we used in the Americana behind me. So I have 2 stars here. We're going to trim one with the left side of the 60, and we're going to trim the other one with the right so that you can see exactly what's happening. So if you had like, 20 of these made up ready to go, put 10 in one stack and put 10 in another stack and trim one stack, all of them with, say, the right side, and then trim the other stack all with the left. So the 60's in the point, you can see that 1/4 of an inch off of the connection of that seam below, and the right side of the 60 is on the seam. And I'm going to turn my block so you can see these pieces right here, and this is going to be big enough to come back in and be a corner square. So I'm going to be saving these and sewing some of my flying geese to some of these corners. This one's pretty small. You can decide to, it would go on the side of a small square. So see how you could take it over here and put it on a square, but it has to be a square that the size is in the correct proportion to that little scrap strip. So this one I could keep and use it for another scrap project. So I'm going to turn my block. I'm going to go to the next corner and continue to use the right side of the 60. So I'm going to put it in there. There's my 1/4 of an inch. I line it up, and then I've already cut over here, and I have to make sure that this is nice and parallel. And look how skinny it is there and how wide it is there. That's not good. So I have to adjust it so that my block stays nice and square on the outside, and I have my 1/4 of an inch and my 60. As it comes down, it's where it starts to waver a little bit. But that's the beauty of the system and helping to remove the human element, because you're still going to get a beautiful block with nice sharp points, smooth flat work, and the pieces are going to sew together great. So here I have my point, my 60 point in the corner of the star. I'm keeping it square here and here, and it is lining up really nice on this one. And I just go ahead at the same time, separate these off and put them in matching little stacks. So repeat this on all 4 corners and make sure you continue with the right side of that 60. And it should stay square underneath. So that's your block and the main part of the quilt. After you get this done, you're ready to just sew it together in rows. So this one we're going to do with the left side of the 60. So here is my 60 in the corner. See how I have the left side. Now these are different angles, so notice how these go. I'll have to start a new stack for those scraps. Okay, now see, I can tell that I've put it on there wrong. I've got the right side on because when I look under here, it's not square. And that's why it's best to, when you're using the right side, do a whole stack. When you're doing the left side, do a whole stack. Don't try to switch back and forth. So see, now it's nice and straight and square. I could have had that a little bit better on that one to make it more square. Okay, so now when you put a left side with a right side, see how these two come together to create this shape, You've got one twisting in, one twisting the other way. And that's really the main part of your block. So let's look at what you're going to do next. So you're going to put those together. And it's really important that you start with the correct one. And I'm pretty sure this long side is the one that you need to start with. We'll double check up here on Jingle Jangle here in just a minute. But see how the long side? So you really need to start with your blocks coming together like this. Don't start with this being your block. You see what I'm saying? See that short side of being your row? I'm pretty sure it's the long one. Let's go ahead and look up here. So I'm going to take this, this mini Americana, and this is from the Americana pattern. We use a 3-inch star, and it took me about 18 months to work on this one. And it's a little bit bigger than a queen. And I also want to say this, when you do a small block, your quilt this is a big quilt, so it's really heavy. And part of the reason why it's so heavy is because if you think about it, there's as much fabric in the seam allowances of it as there is on the top. So it's almost like you have 2 layers of fabric. So small pieces make a heavy quilt because it's just pretty much solid seams underneath here. So think about that for a minute, and I think it'll make sense. And so small quilts really make a heavy quilt. So let's look here at Jingle Jangle, where you can see the whole quilt. You have here's your row, and that's what we were working on. So see, we have the 9 patch here, we've got the star and the one we're working on, and you do start with it on the long side. You do want the long side to start. If you start with the short side, this is going to be a different sequence in this row here. And you only have 2, you have 2 main rows and a little bit of a version of this one. So let's look at this one. So this, just make it however many wide you need. And then in the next row, you're going to have just the star all by itself with some large rectangles connecting. And because you started with the long side here, then you have a little short square here. And then you're going to repeat your row of your stars. They're going to be just the same. And then in the next row, notice how this is scooted over and it's longer. And this, if you do this different, then these sequences are going to work out to be a little bit different. So just start with the long and it'll match up the same. And in the star quilt, you're going to see these stars making a circle and just kind of jingle jangling all across the quilt. So let's put some of this up here and let's get a little bit of a look of what you're going to have. So this is a scrappy quilt that will be in process for me. So I don't have completed stuff to show you the whole quilt, but within the next, let's say 18 months, I'm going to keep working on this and I'll keep showing you the process of putting it together. So each row, if you start with the long side, each row will have to start with the long side. So here is my long side one. Did I do that right? No, I guess not. On the star, it's a little different. It's not. The rows you sew together are the same, but on this one it goes this way, and then on this one it goes this way, okay? We'll go ahead and put 2 more up here since I have them cut. Okay, so you can see here how the stars start to make a circle as they go around through the quilt. I think it's really going to be pretty and fun to do, and it's really a very simple, scrappy quilt that you can use your scraps on, put together with some pretty brainless sewing, and just work on in a continual fashion or method, assembly line method, for an extended length of time, a few months to 18 months to 2 years. And before you know it, your scraps have turned into a beautiful, beautiful quilt. I think this would really be fun to do as a little star, about, like a 2 or 3 inch star, and just have all these little circles of stars going everywhere. Now, also think about reversing color. What if you had a darker color here and all of your stars were light? It would be like a midnight sky with all the little white twinkling stars. I think that would really be pretty and a nice variation. So that's pretty much all of the teaching that I had for you today, but I'm going to check real quick and see if there's any questions. And for those of you that are new, you can email us anytime you have any questions, but you can also text us. We have a quilting text hotline, and that's something that's very, you're going to get, if you have a question about a quilt, or you want to show me a picture of something that you're trying to make, or you have a question about a sizing, how do I make something a certain size, then of course this is a great way to get a hold of me. I think you can get to me quicker and faster than with an email. We kind of try to save our email for orders and shipping and more business part. So that text number is 817-713-2879, and that's even have a special dedicated phone just for you guys, and the only thing that's on that is just your texting. So it's a safe and secure way to get a hold of me. And some people don't do a lot of emails. It's easier for them to just pick up their smartphone and text and take a picture and get it to me. So we have that there for you. Our summer program for our videos and for our teaching is just going to be, we're not going to have a set schedule like a Wednesday at 11 o'clock like we normally have had. It's just going to be when we have something that we're ready to show you, we're just going to show it to you right then. So the best way for you to know about our teachings for the summer is to get on our email list so that you can get an email and a notification that we're going to go live or that we're going to have a teaching. It may be, in an hour, or it may be the next morning, but it'll be a quick kind of impromptu thing. We have a lot of different stuff that we're working on. Our Quilt Club week that we started last year, which is several days of dedicated teaching. We're working on it pretty hot and heavy, and the best way for you to know about it is to be on our email list so that you'll know about our Quilt Club week and our teachings that we're going to have, and it'll be later this winter, into fall, first part of winter. Also working on Houston Quilt Show. We have a new program coming up. We have a summer program in our premium club, and then we'll have a new fall program in our premium club. And if you like our teachings and you want to learn more and see everything that we do, then email us and get information about the premium club. It's a subscription program. You can do it monthly or yearly, or even get a lifetime membership to it. And if you really want to become immersed in the science of patchwork, the square and a square system, and learning how to get your creative juices going, that is really, really a great way to do it. We also have a dedicated Facebook page, community group, where you can ask questions to the other Square and a Square users. You can show your quilts and just have a nice community of very encouraging group of people in the Premium Club Facebook page. I'm really proud of them and how they encourage and help each other. So Steve, do we have some questions before we close out today?
I press my fabric using a wool mat, but I still have to use steam. I'm not sure that's good. Would that be the cause of my human element cutting and stitching my fabrics?
Yes, you need to remember that the human element is in the cutting of your pieces and it's in the sewing of your pieces. And you can be as perfect as you can be in that cutting and in that sewing, but then when you go to the iron to add that heat to it, it changes it. And so you really want to be careful how often you use the heat and how you use the heat. And you add heat and then you add steam to it, you're giving your fabric a double whammy. And so I don't really use any steam. You use steam and heat when you want to change the block. And so not only are you opening that fabric up to change the fibers, but all of those fibers start moving and running away from that heat. And then you add moisture to it. And, you know, fabric was a cotton fiber. It's a natural fiber. So think about your hair. You add heat to it or you add moisture to it. You're going to change those results of what your hair is. If your hair is curly, then it's going to get curlier with heat or that steam. And if your hair is straight, then it's going to get flatter. You know, people aren't happy with their hair when they get heat and steam on it. They change it. Curly people blow dry their hair to straighten it, to change it. And if they go outside and it's got high humidity, it's going to go crazy. It's not going to go back to either one of those, but a third factor. And so that's the way it is with your fabric. Is that when you add heat and steam, you change it. So you want to be very, very careful. Just, I don't know if it was in Premium Club this spring or if it was when I was doing a Wednesday webinar, and I was sewing and something was fitting here perfectly, and I can't remember why I pressed it. I don't know if I was demoing something or whatever, but I pressed it. And then when I got to go sew, my pieces were not lining up perfect, and I kept thinking, they were perfect here, why are they not perfect over there when I'm trying to sew them together? And as I held it in my hand, my fabric was still warm, and I was like, I pressed it, I changed it, and that's why it changed from my perfection here at my cutting table over to my iron. And another thing is if you're using moisture on a wool mat, you're ruining your wool mat, and those are kind of pricey, so you want to think about that.
What's the name of that quilt to the left of the Jingle Jangle?
Okay, so
red quilt.
of course the Jingle Jangle, this one is Abby's wedding quilt. You can get fabric and kits and patterns and stuff on our website. Those of you that are very new to us, it's squareinasquare.com. That's where you go and purchase all of our books, rulers, patterns, and fabrics. And then also the one next to it here is called Southern Skies, and it's in our Melee Women book. And we're going to be doing more teaching and demoing with it as I get my scraps going on it. Okay, so we have another question.
I don't think so.
He's checking to see if we have any more questions. So I want to wish you guys a happy Memorial Weekend, and thank you for watching. I know there's people all across the globe watching, but here in the U.S. we have our kickoff for summer, which is the last weekend of May, what we call Memorial Weekend. And it kind of started as a celebration for the people who gave their life to their country. And people use it as a kickoff for the summer. And so our schedule kind of changes for summer, so make sure you're on our email list so that you will be updated on everything that we have going on. Usually I say we're doing every Wednesday webinars or every other Wednesday webinars, but for our summer months it's going to be impromptu as we need. Anything else, Steve?
No, that's it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed the teaching today of the Star Jingle. And remember our text line, 817-713-2879. Make sure you keep a notebook and make notes of all of our different webinars so that you'll know to go back to a certain one to watch when I did whatever. And it's really remember, if you immerse yourself 15 minutes a day into whatever it is that you're wanting to learn, or a habit that you're wanting to break, or start a walking exercise program, or house cleaning, whatever it is, if you do something for 15 minutes a day, it really immerses you into that. So learn something, quilting, whatever, 15 minutes a day. And I kind of challenged some of the people a few days ago on the webinar that as this summer goes and you're starting a new month and maybe a new schedule with a summer schedule, say, I'm going to learn square and square 15 minutes a day. And you will learn it, you'll get those square eyes, and you'll be able to make beautiful quilts, fast, fabulous, and finished. Thanks for watching.